But before that, I'll note a few housekeeping items. First, you'll note that the attendees are all muted. And so for this webinar, we're going to ask to keep you muted. And if you've got questions, please put them in the questions box, which you should see on the side of your screen. We will also hold the questions until after the webinar. And so if you could put your questions, feel free to type them in the questions box at any time, and we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. The webinar will be recorded, and we will post a link in the OALA members area of the website. As well, a link to the recording will be emailed to all attendees of the presentation, so you'll get that in a few hours. The presentation will not be with it, a PowerPoint, because all of the information is covered quite easily in the recording. The email with the recording will also have a short survey. It'll take less than 1 minute and 30 seconds to complete, but it helps the CEC, the Continuing Education Committee, to organize future webinars. So if you've got time, please do that. And there will be a certificate to confirm your attendance that you receive as well, so that you can download that if you are planning to submit a continuing education credit for this. And you may submit 1 CE credit for attending this webinar, or for watching the webinar as recorded at a later date. So that is it for the information, and I will now pass the microphone to Werner.
Thank you, Ingrid, and thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Werner Schwar. I'm a member of the Continuing Education Committee for the OALA, and today I have the pleasure of acting as moderator and also introducing our guest, Glenn O'Connor, who is going to talk about the Canadian Landscape Charter from the CSLA. To start things off, could you please write the name of your own location in the question area, so we have a sense of the geographical range within our audience. And if you could do this in the next 30 seconds or a minute, that would be great. Thank you. So first, we'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Please place your feet on the ground and breathe the air at your location. We recognize that our work takes place on traditional Indigenous territories across Ontario. We also wish to acknowledge that the Ontario Association of Landscape Architects head office is located on the traditional Indigenous territory of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This territory is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. And we acknowledge that Ontario is home to First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people from many territories, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to meet and work with them. I personally have the good fortune of speaking to you from the city of Thunder Bay, a very snowy city of Thunder Bay today, and I reside beside the Great Lake Gitchagumi and in the shadow of Anamiki-Waju, the traditional territory of Fort William First Nation, which was signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850, and have the privilege of sharing the beautiful Northwestern Ontario land, water, and air with the First Nation. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our presenter, Glenn O'Connor. So Glenn is past president of the OALA and CSLA and has been on numerous provincial and national committees. He is a leader, strategist, and landscape architect who has shaped water park design in 10 countries and on 3 continents. As a principal in charge, he has worked in collaboration with public agencies, private owners and operators, and operated a consulting firm and spent 30 years honing his craft on many large-scale projects, studies, master plans, built works, institutional campus projects, recreation, community projects, and healthcare projects. During his career, he's been expert witness on the Ontario Municipal Board, Niagara Escarpment Commission, consolidated board hearings, as well as divisional court hearings for issues such as visual assessment and resource analysis. He brings a wide array of experience and guidance to his work through a 40-year career, where more than 1,300 built and planned design portfolio projects has been recognized by 21 domestic and international awards. And finally, on a more personal note, I'd like to acknowledge that I've had the pleasure of knowing Glenn since 1988, whereas as a fourth-year student at a U of T, I knocked on his door asking for a summer job, and then he graciously gave me a chance. And then after graduating the year after, offered me a full-time job. So he became my OALA PDP person and mentor, and has really taught me a lot of what I know. And in addition, he helped me prepare for the first ever layer exam in Ontario. And in addition, he was quite progressive at the time, allowing me flexible time off to pursue my winters off for ski racing until I moved to Thunder Bay in 1993. And at that time, it was nose to the grindstone in most offices. So thank you, Glenn, for being progressive at that time. Now, please help me welcome Glenn to begin his presentation.
Thanks, Werner. I really appreciate that. And I'd like to acknowledge, first of all, that I am currently sitting in Collingwood, Ontario, traditional lands of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island and land of the Anishinaabe nations. Just so people know, we have about 125 people registered, of which 75% are members, which is interesting, and we have quite a few non-members attending, so welcome to everybody. And I'm really pleased to be able to be here today and just share some things with you. I'll come back in a moment, Werner. Maybe while I'm just making a couple of remarks, you can check where people are coming from and let us know, because I think it'd be kind of fun to know. And since we're sitting here virtually and we can't see each other, I just want to share a couple of thoughts with you. First of all, as Werner mentioned, I've known him since 1988, and so for some of you, that's probably a long time ago, and certainly I guess that makes me an old guy. But I want to share something that's an interesting fact that Werner's pretty shy and he wouldn't tell you, but I'm just going to share it anyway. I hope he doesn't mind. So Werner wrote the first LARE exams, meaning session 1. And he phoned me, he was up in Thunder Bay, and he phoned me and he said that he was going to come down and he wanted to write them all at once. And I thought, what do you mean write them all at once? And he goes, well, I'm going to do them all, and they're over 3 days. So just so you understand, Werner did 3 days of exams in a row. Day 1 was 2 exams of about 4 hours each. And he did 2 of those. So he did 2 8-hour days of exams. And the 3rd day, he did 3 times 3 multiple exams, which are about 2 hours each. So if you think about that, you go, wait a second. He came down, did all the LAREs, which at that time was 7 modules in 3 days, which as far as I know, nobody has ever done it since, and probably it's not the smartest thing. But I think the point is that what it lets you know is that Werner's a very bright man and he's very focused, and he used that focus when he was on the national cross-country ski team representing Canada at international events in many places. So I think when you have a focus like that, you bring that focus to your profession, and I think your passion shows through. So kudos to Werner for doing that. Werner, can you just let us know roughly where people are residing from today, where they're visiting from?
Sure. We actually have people from all across the country. I have Vancouver, Calgary, Halifax, and then Gatineau, Quebec, and a whole bunch in Ontario. So we're national today, Glenn.
Wow. Well, welcome everybody. And I think what's interesting about that is it shows that we are a profession from coast to coast to coast. And the presentation today, just so everybody knows, we won't use the full hour. You'll be getting out, ahead of time. We'll probably need around, with questions, depending on how it goes, probably around 40, 45 minutes. But I think the idea is that this is a high-level presentation. I want to share with you a little bit about the Canadian Landscape Charter and, try and give you some background about it. We're going to talk a little bit about the CSLA. Some of you may be familiar and some not, so I want to give you a little bit of background about the CSLA. We're going to talk about what is the Canadian Landscape Charter, and I'll try and clarify that for you. And I don't know if you can still see my camera okay. Can you, Werner?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the actual document. And so when we talk about this, I just want to hold it up, and this is the 2-pager. It's not a large document. It's 2 pages in English, 2 pages in French, and then it has a signatory spot. So I would encourage you to get a copy of that. You can download it from the CSLA website. I'll give you the link at the end, or you can get paper copies through Michelle Legault, the Executive Director of the CSLA. We're going to talk about what the purpose of the Canadian Landscape Charter is, and how did this even begin? It has an interesting background that I'll share with you some personal insights. And we'll talk about the core principles of the Charter. We'll talk about why is the Charter important? What's the big deal? Why is this of interest? We'll talk about how the CSLA, the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects, incorporates the Charter into the strategic plan. We'll talk about some of the key objectives of the Charter itself. What can you do as members to support the Canadian Landscape Charter? So we'll have some final thoughts, and we've left some time for questions. And I think, Werner, you're going to have people type those into the question dialog box. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Perfect. Okay.
And Ingrid and I will be monitoring those.
Excellent. So the CSLA, who's the CSLA? Well, that's all of us. And people forget sometimes that when you're a member of a component, you're also a member of the national organization. So the CSLA was founded in 1934. It's the national voice of Canada's landscape architects for almost a century. And there's over 3,500 members, and the CSLA is also a member of IFLA, which is the International Federation of Landscape Architects. What I'd mentioned, what I would draw to your attention is Ontario is one of 9 components, and we're roughly 50% of national membership. So we have a voice at the table, just like everybody else from coast to coast to coast. And we are represented in our various component provinces or territories. The CSLA is dedicated to advancing the art, science, and practice of landscape architecture. It's also the advocate for our members, all of us, on issues such as urban design, urban renewal, sustainable development, human health and well-being, climate change, and of course, cultural heritage. And again, as I mentioned, there's 9 components, and you can see them on the display. So it's interesting to note how we all fit in together. And as Werner mentioned, and as people responded, we have people from across the country today, and it really speaks to how vibrant the profession is. So the CSLA delivers programs and services for its members, and you'll see in this background, this is the CSLA College of Fellows medal. This one happens to be Jane Durante's. And this is the medal that's awarded when you become a fellow, and I happen to be a fellow. So this is one of the things that you get along with the certificate. The CSLA delivers programs that increase public awareness and promote the profession, and we've seen this over the last few years become increasingly important as we make contact with our MPs and with OALA through the MPPs and municipal staff and so forth. The CSLA also provides opportunities for professional development, whether it's through the continuing education at a national level during the AGM conference or events such as this. We're all connected together. So think of it as one pair of pants with 9 pockets. The CSLA also recognizes members and celebrates their achievements through awards programs and various types of professional awards, and you'll see those published, annually. We also support education and research, and I say we, I mean all of us, and meaning as members, whether a component or the CSLA, we're all here to increase and support each other and broaden research and the profession through LACF and other venues as well. So I showed you a picture earlier of the charter, and there's the cover, of course. So what is this Canadian Landscape Charter, the CLC? The charter helps us identifying issues that affect our landscapes. It also determines how we can enhance the study, enjoyment, and awareness and defense of landscapes. So think of this as a high-level principles document. It's meant to set intent and outline direction. And the CLC was signed by the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects Executive Committee, the CSLA components president, which again is all the 9 components, Mexico representatives, IFLA representatives, as well as individual members that were in attendance at the CSLA Congress that was held in 2015. So what's the purpose of this charter? What's it all about? So the purpose of the charter is to recognize, protect, manage, and celebrate Canada's landscapes. It's that simple. It's really to think about the landscape in a different way, to think about the totality of the landscape and the environment that we live in and how we interact with it. And I think it's important for us just to think of that in that kind of context. So I mentioned that we talk about how this began, and in 2010 at the UNESCO World Summit, IFLA, which is the International Federation of Landscape Architects on the left, you see, proposed to create a global landscape convention. So in 2012, CSLA responded to IFLA's landscape convention project by creating a task force. And this was driven by and large by Jean Landry, AAPQ member, who took on this task and this role to develop this Canadian Landscape Charter. And he worked with Michel Legault, the executive director of CSLA, and others to refine this. And I recall at the time in 2012 to 2014, I was on the CSLA board. I represented Ontario as a component as the past president. And I remember challenging Jean, and I'm sure he remembers pretty well too, but I didn't understand this thing. I didn't really know what they were trying to achieve, and I couldn't get my head around it, what it was going to be. So as this evolved, Jean was able to articulate and clarify and strengthen this document to really distill what were the ideas. And I think he did an excellent job. And that's the document that we have today before you. So from this task force, by 2015, the Canadian Landscape Charter, the CLC, was ratified by the CSLA board and the component associations. So let's talk about some of the core principles of the charter for a moment. So there are a number of key principles, and again, think of this as a guiding level document that really makes us just all stop and think for a moment. So one of the principles is to recognize landscapes as vital. And I think we've seen that over the last 2 years. It's, for me anyway, it's magnified the importance of public open space, maybe for some of you attending today as well. It's to consider all people. And I think today that's more relevant than ever as we look at all peoples across the nation. And you'll see embedded in the document, when you have a look at it online or paper copy, you'll see that. And that was an important principle. It's to inspire stewardship. And again, as landscape architects, we have a role in looking at the larger landscape and thinking about how people and plants integrate and react in the landscape and how we can protect those core values. It's also meant to expand knowledge and share knowledge, such as today when we share knowledge with each other through presentations and discussions. It's to show leadership. Again, landscape architects, I think this is really our time in the profession, and certainly when I graduated, it was a different point in history with respect to, I used to get asked what a landscape architect is, and then I would get asked, well, what do you do in the winter? Do you plow snow? Well, we've gone a long way since then, luckily. But the format of the charter was devised to reinforce the diversity found in Canadian provinces and territories, while developing shared values around a common vision, reflecting how CSLA members professionally interact with all forms of landscape. So again, think of this as a guiding principle. It's an upper level document, upper tier document, if you would. So why is the Charter important? Well, the Charter recognizes Canada's landscapes, all of them, and seeks to protect, manage, and celebrate these. And because we have people across from coast to coast to coast today, we can all think of a place or places that are important to us that start to reflect that idea of the landscape. We can think of landscapes that are regularly subject to environmental, social, and economic pressures, whether it be development or urban expansion or other issues that come up. And those things start to connect back to climate and all sorts of other issues that we all deal with on a daily basis in our practices. It also looks at actions to protect or manage landscapes, and it requires coordinated actions and resources. And think of landscapes being vital to our well-being and existence. And as I mentioned, especially in the last couple of years, I think we've all started to really see how important that is. And the idea really simply is that the Charter inspires stewardship, it expands our knowledge, and allows us to demonstrate leadership. And I think those are important thoughts. So now that we've got the Charter, what do we do with this? Well, the CSLA has incorporated the Charter and its thinking into the CSLA strategic plan. That's updated similar to many components. It's updated regularly, and it's good for a 3-year kind of time frame. So by establishing and supporting the Charter, the CSLA adopted these guiding principles and committed to an improved and sustainable living environment for all. So again, thinking about this as a higher level document, how do we incorporate and how do we work with that? And the Charter's guiding principles are really intended to provide a roadmap that achieve outcomes, measurable outcomes. So again, if we think about the bigger picture strategic plan of the CSLA or any of the components for the listeners, it's about thinking and checking and considering, and it's a way for us to, give an extra thought to what we're doing. So the CSLA operates with the Charter at its core for activity and engagement. And the Charter also guides the work of the Landscape Architecture Canada Foundation, or the LACF. And in fact, there's a scholarship named for the Canadian Landscape Charter for a recipient that presents those values. And there's information on the website. But this goes back to the idea of connecting us together, of tying research and thinking together with the Charter and expanding knowledge. And the LACF does a wonderful job at that and has an excellent board and a group of people organizing that. And it's also collected a significant amount of money so that it is now able to really push the agenda and give out some major scholarships, which I think is great. Let's think about some of the key objectives of the Charter. One, to provide Canada's landscape architects, all of us, with a Charter that shares priorities and values identified by our international colleagues while protecting our particular characteristics and identity. So in other words, connecting the international discussion of 2010 back to our own landscape and what's important in Canada from coast to coast to coast. It also developed a landscape charter that highlights the values and approaches advocated by Canada's landscape architects, which is all of us. Identify subjects, themes, or specialties impacting landscapes and ultimately aspects of landscape architecture that could be developed or studied at both the national and regional levels. And I think what's interesting about that is we can connect now the charter, we can connect our practicing membership and the research that they're doing and driving new areas. We can connect it to the LACF. So you start to see how some of these components come together and all of us can contribute to this in a larger way. We can communicate the charter values, principles, research tools, and capacity. So again, that's one of the objectives of this whole thing. and to devise strategies and action plans to attain the charter objectives. So again, how do we think about making this happen? How do we implement this, and how do we have it in our daily practice? So you might be sitting there thinking, okay, so what can I do to support the charter? Well, there's a number of things. And again, think of the charter as a high-level guiding document. So first of all, you can talk about it. You can get copies of the charter, the digital copies available, and I'll show you the link in a moment. You can give it to public agencies, your clients, or other people that you know, and you can get paper copies or digital copies of that. There's also a small one, I call it spread the word, but smaller. There's a little postcard available that you can get from Michelle Legault at the CSLA office, and it's kind of a fun little postcard that was developed just to show the charter. And you can endorse it by adding your name to the list of signatories on the charter at the CSLA website. So there's a number of different ways you can think about it, but again, think of this as a guiding document in the back of your mind. You could also share images. There's been a few in this presentation, but you can share images of your favorite landscapes or landscapes that you're dreaming of, and you can put those to Instagram and you can tag the CSLA. So this is something that over time the CSLA is going to continue to develop and evolve the whole Instagram and some of the portfolio images. So today, for example, we have our event online, but when the charter first came out, the CSLA board approved Jean Landry to travel across different cities across Canada and present the ideas and the principles of the charter and take it on the road trip. And since we're not doing that currently, the presentation today, of course, is online, and you can get a copy of this presentation from the OALA office through Ingrid following this. So we've already given them a copy of it. So it's, again, something you can take a look at in further detail, and you can also look at the actual document itself. You can get involved. I think this is one of the big messages that you should really think about is you can get involved with the LACF, you can get involved with your component association, you can get involved with the CSLA. So there's a number of issues that are regional, provincial or territorial or national. And I would encourage all of you at some point to get involved and make a difference at the association and make a difference provincially or nationally. And it's quite rewarding actually to get involved. So I just want to share with you the location of the charter, which is shown right here. It's on the CSLA's website. You can download it. And again, if you want paper copies, please feel free to reach out to the executive director, Michelle Legault, and she'd be happy to send you some. And I think for me, the global pandemic has shown us all how relevant landscapes are to people's health, the access to public spaces and enjoyment of public spaces. And really, I think if we all start to think about what does this do for the profession and the future of the profession, I think really our time as landscape architects is now. And, as I've had a chance through my career over 40 plus years to work with a lot of different professionals, and I would say to all of you that the time for landscape architects is really now. So if you're entering the profession as a recent graduate or a recent member, you're really at a different point in time than when Werner and I graduated and when we started practicing. So anyway, it's a great time in my mind to be a landscape architect, and I think that's something that you just need to think about, and perhaps you may have taken for granted because you didn't know what it was like previously, but it's a great time to be practicing. So with that, I think, Werner, I will stop there and thank everybody for their attention, and we can take a few questions if we could.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn, for that very informative and great presentation. So like Glenn said, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the questions box, and Ingrid and I will be monitoring and reading those. Maybe while we're waiting for people, I have one myself, Glenn, that maybe you can answer. So the CLC was developed in 2015, as you said, and that's 7 years ago now, hard to believe. What do you feel has been the biggest accomplishment of the CLC so far? And what aspect has provided the greatest challenge over that time?
Great question, Werner. Well, I think quite a few things. Can you just see, is this showing the thank you? I've tried to stop sharing here just for a second.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
I just see Ingrid, myself, and you.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Okay, great. Good. Okay. Great. So thanks. So yeah. So first of all, I just wanted to say that I think a number of things have changed since 2015, and I think the relevance of this today is as great as it is as it ever was, and even in many ways more important than when we set this up initially. And I think that as time has gone on, I think some of the content and information that was in the document is even more relevant. And I think when it was created, Werner, you know, recognizing landscapes as vital, but it also talked about considering all people. So I think in many ways, where we've come about after a number of years has really demonstrated that this is an important document and it's an important body of knowledge. So I think that it's continued to really show how it was timeless in a way. And perhaps at some point it needs to be updated, but I think for now it's probably still relevant.
So with, especially I guess with the pandemic and issues like reconciliation, you feel it's still a relevant document for those things, maybe even more so now, I guess.
Absolutely, yes. And great question. So I think that in my mind, I think that, you know, the whole, I guess if you're thinking about it in a different way was, you know, after 7 years, a lot of things have changed, but I think that the LACF, for example, is a stronger organization than it ever was and is more integral to what we're doing. I think that, you know, the profession, the scholarships, and all of the values have really been exemplified. And many of the components, Werner, are using the CLC as a guiding document in their background and using it to help them. So I think, you know, even though it's 7 years old, I think that some of the values and ideas expressed in it initially are still relevant today.
That's actually a perfect lead-in, Glenn, to one of our first questions. The question being, is it expected or desired that the provincial organizations develop their own landscape charters to fit under the CLC? And has there been any thought as to what these might look like?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, so what I would say is I don't think it's necessary for each component to develop their own, although it's entirely possible. What I would say is, again, thinking again of, I like to try and think strategically about the association, that we're all members of CSLA. So each component is a member and each member is a member of CSLA. So what I would encourage us all to think about is sharing resources and using those at whether it's a national or component level and cross-sharing them. So I don't think it's necessary, Werner, for each component to develop it, although there may be things that regionally are more important that the component wants to look at. So I would say for the moment, I think that certainly the CLC on a national basis would cover off the components, but the components may wish to delve into that in more detail.
So it's a flexible enough document to allow for that to happen then?
I think so. And remember that the components were the signatories to this, so they are already part of it. And you know, there may be a point at, in the future where the components want to revisit some of the language in this and update it and make it more contemporary. And I think that's perfectly fine and acceptable. So there, you know, I think it's a when rather than if question, but I think for the time being, I think it would be good for the components to work with this.
Okay, great. Is the next question, is the CSLA collaborating or considering collaborating with the ASLA, and more specifically the TCLF, with respect to protecting, managing, and celebrating Canadian landscapes? It seems that the charter is aligned with the TCLF objectives.
Okay.
And that's the question.
Yeah, excellent question. So CSLA and ASLA do collaborate in the sense that there's a lot of dialogue between the two organizations. So I know when I took my turn as president of the CSLA, certainly attending the conferences, but there's a president's roundtable and there's other things that are happening. And I think as time goes on, that needs to be strengthened, and the relationship between CSLA and ASLA can continue to be strengthened. And I think that that's an area, for example, that the collaboration and cross-sharing of information can continue and even be stronger. So I can give you one example where CSLA and ASLA were collaborating, and that's climate change and climate adaptation. And the CSLA saw us as leaders, and I think, in fact, we are. We have some phenomenal work being done by the members at a national level and an international level now. And the CSLA and ASLA were working closely on some of those issues, and the CSLA was sharing a lot of that information with the ASLA. So in some areas, the ASLA is well ahead of us. In other areas, I think you'll find that the CSLA is well ahead. So I think, you know, again, we're all one community, and you know, breaking down some of the borders between, you know, the north and the south, and certainly going coast to coast to coast, I think is important.
Yeah, thank you for that. Not seeing any more questions right now, so if you do have any questions, please type them in the question. Oh, got another one there.
Okay.
You mentioned that that's a great time today to be practicing a landscape architect. Could you elaborate on why you feel this way in a post-pandemic world?
Absolutely. So for those that don't know, I graduated in 1981 from U of T, so 41 years ago. And as I mentioned earlier, it was very serious that people would ask me what I did in the winter. They didn't know what a landscape architect was. And we were almost an invisible profession. There was some phenomenal work done by our predecessors, without question. But the profession as a whole, Werner, wasn't as easily recognized. Everybody knew what an architect was. Everybody knew what an engineer was, or they thought, you know, they know what generally they did. Landscape architects, and if you remember what was going on at the time, Landscape Ontario, landscape architecture, there was some confusion with the public about who did what. And of course, you know, we have Bill PR 37 in Ontario, our NAME Act, which was passed in 85, I believe. So times are quite different now than when I graduated, and even when you graduated, I'm sure you would see. And landscape architects are leading major projects. For the last 7 or so years, I led a lot of work internationally. Landscape architects are highly regarded and highly respected. And I can't say it was like that 40 years ago, but I can say it's like that now. And I really think that a lot of other professions are trying to be the green profession. And we don't have to try. We are the green profession, and we deal with unenclosed space in general. We deal with the environment and the interaction of people and the environment. And I think we do it better than any other profession. And so that's why I say I think it's a great time to be a landscape architect, not only because the public understands us, but government understands us. And I think by and large that has come about over the last number of years by components meeting with provincial or territorial members of parliament and through national efforts and all of those things combined, I think makes it a great time to be a landscape architect. So to me, I think we're handing off to the next generation at a time where I think it's exciting. You know, you've really got phenomenal opportunities to be leaders, and you need to take that leadership role.
And to that, I might add, I think we sometimes are the glue that can hold projects together from different consultants.
Absolutely.
Not just the engineers or the architects, but the bridge between some of those other professions that I think we can really shine. And that post-pandemic has become more and more evident that we need to get our house in order and look at the bigger picture rather than everyone in a silo.
Absolutely, Werner. Great point. And I think that, you know, as leaders, we bring teams together. We have a broad understanding of issues and with the built and planned environments. And I think that for many of the newer members, this is really the time, be leaders and take charge as a team and go forward. And, you know, in my practice, we would assemble teams of players from across the country and the US, and we bring together the expertise that we needed to try and solve problems. And I saw over the last 7 years practicing internationally that we bring people in from all over the world, but we were the leaders. Landscape architects were the team leaders putting together projects. And, you know, when I started, that wasn't the case at all. And, you know, we tried to push the envelope, and it took a long time to push. And, you know, when you and I worked together, it was, we were doing much more simplistic or basic work. And over time that evolved. So to the newer members and those practicing, this is really your time.
So I have another question for you, Glenn. We've talked a lot about the bigger picture, the ideas and principles of the Canadian Landscape Charter. But then if we take it down to sort of the everyday working level, like how do you use the CLC in your everyday practice?
Okay, that's a great question. So, well, first of all, you know, we can think about it guiding us as landscape architects, and everybody has slightly different practice, whatever it is they're doing, whether it's municipal or private practice or federal or whatever it would be. But think about the profession and what landscapes are, that they're vital places to humans. And if we take it at the most simplistic form, we need nature, but nature doesn't need us. We always have to put that in context, that as we're doing something, are we doing something that will impact the land adversely? Or are we doing something that can have a positive impact? And, you know, and putting it into practice in your daily life, just thinking about the context of what we're doing or what you're doing, and the foundations of the practice and the science that you've learned through school and continuing education, but really trying to transfer that into what you do. And, you know, whether it's research into, you know, plant ecology or research into habitats or whatever it would be, and taking that a little farther and trying to leave the place a little better than we each found it. So I think for my mind, thinking of some of those key principles and organization tools and objectives and how we can bring that down, that's how I think about it as I'm doing my work.
Okay, well, thank you, Glenn. Ingrid, are you seeing any more questions?
The one question that I know, Glenn, you gave a general answer to it, but I thought it might help. First, I wanted to thank you for mentioning in how important it is on the volunteers, because I think it really, both the CSLA and OALA and all the components really are not only run by them, they do all the legwork, but they also do all the strategic thinking on it. So I think that's helpful for people to know. So thank you both, because I know you both do a lot of that legwork part. And one question was just if it's a living document, how often is it updated? And I just, for me even, I wondered, it would be the CSLA with the components that do it, but I wasn't sure if there is a plan right now on a timing schedule or anything like that, because it's printed now. Obviously, it's also online, which is easier to update. And I didn't know if you didn't know that, if maybe it's something that we should be just checking with the CSLA, because that might be helpful for members to know. And if so, if they should be sending in ideas either to their component or to the CSLA of where they think we might need to update it.
I think that's a good idea, Ingrid. So whoever asked a great question. I think, first of all, the simple answer is it was finished in 2015, as I mentioned, and the signatories were part of it. And I think it's still relevant today. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be updated. And I think it probably would be worth the individuals or the components putting together their thoughts and ideas about where it could be updated or should be updated. And I think that's important. I think it's a document that's pretty solid. However, you know, all documents can stand the test of a certain amount of time, but they're not indefinite. And I think in my mind, to date, it's done a good job, and it probably can do a better job in the future as it's refined. So I think the short answer is the components can contact the CSLA with ideas or suggestions for enhancement, and the CSLA and the board can then look at it and decide when to make an update when there's sufficient items. So I think it's a good idea, and you know, refining it as time goes on and as our needs change and evolve certainly makes a lot of sense, Ingrid. Yeah.
Great, thanks. So it was George that asked that question. So George, you may have ideas. Feel free to email them to me, and we'll gather them up. As a component, we do meet often with the CSLA, and on this matter, I would take guidance from the CSLA as to how they wanted to get that information. But we're always open to it. Feel free, if you've got suggestions, to just email them through to me, and I'll find where best to send them and let you know where that is.
Absolutely.
That's helpful. And it is, I did say to Glenn and Werner that really Werner is our lead host on this, but my main role was to keep time. So you're close to that planning, and that we're just after 10 to 1. So Glenn, I think you met on your promise of giving people back that little bit of extra time on their lunch hours. So I'll just start by thanking Werner for really doing all of the hosting job on this, and then maybe I'll ask Werner to kind of close out for the new webinar today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ingrid, and thank you, Glenn, for the great presentation. Much appreciated. We at the CEC really rely on our volunteer members of the profession to share their knowledge with the rest of the profession, and I think your points about how the newer members of our profession can get involved in the profession and really look at being the best landscape architect they can be for the times is a really important point, and thank you very much for that.
Yeah. You know, I appreciate being here today, and I wish we were all sitting in one room, and maybe some of you prefer this format, but I think, you know, I would encourage all of you to, in closing, not just to think about the CLC, but to think about volunteering and giving back. And that's where I found in my career that it was enriching, and I learned a lot, sharing knowledge with other people and picking up knowledge. And you know, if there's lots of opportunities to volunteer, whether it's at your component or nationally or otherwise. So yeah, please do.
Thank you everyone for attending, and hope you have a good afternoon.
Bye everybody.
Thank you.